Hey everybody, I'm Marie Bard Curtis of the Quilted Poodle. I'm here with a Q-Zone Pro frame and a 16X Elite long arm. So I'm going to use QCT 6, the latest version, 6.00.60, and I'm going to use the lowest tier of the software in the edge-to-edge version. So I'm going to show you how to quickly create a pantograph, and I'm going to use the hoop frame where you have to shift your pattern or shift your fabric over to the left in order to create your design from edge to edge. So stick with me, let's see what happens. So I already have my fabric loaded, and I have backing, batting, and my quilt fabric. And if you notice, I have loaded my backing fabric, and it's connected here on my frame, and I have plenty of batting up here at the top, and my quilt top is lowered down here on the batting in order to have enough space to have my safe area and then to have enough room to successfully create my quilt. As you can see from the software, I have Quilters Creative Touch 6 with gold access, but I am going to try other product tiers and go down to the lowest version, QCT 6. Now I'm in edge to edge. And I've already basted down my quilt top, so I'm ready to start the program. So the first thing you have to do is fabric fit selection. And you notice from the icons, you can either have your quilt or your design fit within your frame, in which case you don't have to shift your fabric. But in my case, my quilt top is larger than my frame, so it's draped over the side, and I will have to move my quilt or shift it to the left in order to quilt the entire quilt. Okay, so I'm going to choose as my fabric fit selection the one on the left. Now I'm going to set my safe area. I'm going to go over to the left, and I'm going to set my safe area about 2 inches below where my take-up rail is. So about 2 inches away from there and about 8 inches away from my side, so that the shoulders or the legs of my machine don't hit the side rails. So that's going to be probably about here. So I'm going to make that my top left. Now I'm going to go over to my bottom right, and again I'm going to choose an area that's about 8 inches away from my side rail, and I'll know if I'm far enough away because if I'm too close, I'm going to bump the side rails. So I'll come in a little bit and then pull forward, and that's going to be my bottom right. Now, I get to select my design. And when I'm selecting my design, because I am in the edge-to-edge program, it goes immediately into the new patterns that came with edge-to-edge. And I'm going to go to the second page, and I'm going to use the Hill Bark Small edge-to-edge. And open. Okay, there's my pattern. So I'm going to go to next, and I can decide what size or I want my pattern height to be. And considering how much space I have here, and I have a ruler right here, so the amount of quilt top showing that I have right now is about 12 inches. And considering on a Hoop Frame Pro, I can stitch about 85% of my height area. And if I've got 12 inches showing here, I can probably stitch about 9 inches of that. So I want to have a rather large pattern. So maybe I will select 6.5 inches for my row height. So I'm just going to tap right here. Maybe I'll use my pen. I'm going to put in 6.5. Oops, that one doesn't work. I'll use my finger. 6.5. 1.5 as the height of my pattern, and I will say okay. So that gets a little bit bigger, and then I'll go to next. And now I want to adjust for row spacing. Now, whether or not the area of my quilt, my safe area, will allow for 2 rows, it does not matter. It just matters when I am placing each successive row, how much space I will have between those rows. So right now, these are pretty close together, and if I needed a better look, I can always go to the magnifier. And you can see there's not very much space between those rows. So I can either minus it or plus it to add more space, or I can just click on the 0 and add a number. So why don't I say 1.5 as a plus? Ooh, that seems too much. Okay, maybe 1. And I'll take this back to the original size. That's still too much. Let's take some away. And I think that looks pretty good. So I'm going to go to next. Now, the software is asking me to select my quilt top edges. And because my quilt goes over the side, I need to select my top left. But if I was doing like a placemat and all of my project would fit inside of my safe area, I might choose one of the selections over here on the right. But for my purposes, I'm going to choose the top left because that's where I'm located on my quilt top. So I'm going to choose here. And the white indicates my quilt top, and the pink indicates the batting. So I want to place my quilt, or place my pattern, within the white of my quilt top. So I'm going to go over to the left, and I'm going to use my placement nodes to locate the upper leftmost portion of my quilt top edges. So I'm going to move over here, and again, taking into account, I don't want to get too close to my rail because my machine will bump into the side of my frame. So I think a good point for me to locate the top edge of my quilt would be probably about here. And that's not going to work. It's saying that's too close to my safe area, so I'm going to pull this down just a tad, and I'm going to say okay, and I'm going to reposition that node down a little bit more. Reposition. All right. That's the area where I need to be stitching for the top of my pattern. I was too close to the safe area. So now I'm just going to bring my machine forward, and I'm going to place my next node. So before the nodes have been placed, they are gray. Once they are placed, they turn green. So now I can go across to the right, and knowing that, again, I have to still be about 8 inches away from the side rail. I just bumped the rail right there. So around here is going to be good. And probably placing it about there would be perfect. So I'll touch my gray node here. A little bit too high. Bring it down some. Say okay. All right. So all of my nodes are green, so I have placed my design. Next. So as you can see, my pattern is going to stitch in the white area. There will be a little bit of the pattern that will be clipped off and will not stitch in the batting. So it's going to be clipped off, but it's placed perfectly so that I do not have too much empty space right here. So what the software is now telling me to do is to mark the left placement. So I'm going to be give my computer a break, And I'm just going to move it over here to the left. And then I can place a sticker where that leftmost placement will be. So instead of placing a sticker, I have a marking pen somewhere. I'm going to use my red marker. I'm going to mark where that leftmost placement should be. So I'm close to it, and so now I'm going to hit the Move Left button and then let the machine move to that placement. So rather than have my machine move all the way over here by itself, I'll just get it closer. Okay, so there is the point right there. And then I'm going to hit single stitch. So the machine releases after it does a single stitch. I'm going to move it away, and I can still see where the thread is coming through the quilt top. So I'm going to make a little circle right there. Okay. Now I need to place the rightmost portion where my placement node is. And again, I'm going to move it a little bit closer to that point, somewhere around here. And then I'm going to say, move right. I'm pretty close. And that's where that point is. And have a single stitch. And the machine releases after the single stitch. And again, you can see the thread coming up through the quilt top. So I'm going to circle right there. Now you can use an area erasable marker. That would be helpful. All right, so I've marked that area. Next. So it's clipped off that area of the pattern that is not going to stitch. And so the green circle here is where my pattern is going to begin. And of course, it's going to begin over on the left. In this tier of edge-to-edge quilting, all of your designs begin stitching on the left and go to the right. So I'm just going to help my machine along. I'm going to move it over to the left a little bit. And so what the machine is going to do is it's going to find its location. It's going to, I have moved the machine close to where the needle is going to go to the start point. So the needle will move to the start and do a single stitch. So it's going to move over here to where it will start to stitch my pattern. It just doesn't have as far to go. It's going to be up here, and if you're looking at the screen, you see the red dotted line, which is the traveling line of the machine. So this is where my start is going to be. Again, just taking a single stitch. I can see where the needle has gone through the fabric. The thread has gone down into my quilt top. I'm going to take another stitch or another circle, and I can even put an S because that's going to be the start. At this point, I'm going to pull up my bobbin thread so I can move away, and you can see my bobbin thread is coming up. I can move back. Next. At this point, when I hit sew, it will begin to sew my pattern. But prior to stitching out my pattern, what I can do at this point is to go to settings, make sure that I have the stitches per inch that I want. Maybe I can change that to 11. The number of tie-off stitches that I want. I could go through the pull bobbin sequence, but I've already done that. So I'm okay with everything there. I'll say okay. And I'm going to push the start button. If for any reason I needed to repair pattern, this would be the time to do it in the red toolbox. And the software will lock onto the pattern and it will begin to sew exactly right here at the beginning point. So I'm going to hit sew. I'm hanging on to my threads so they don't get knotted up underneath my quilt. Okay, at this point I can break thread, and so all I have to do is move the machine. At this point it's pulling bobbin thread with it, then move it back to the point where it stopped. Grab my scissors. I can hit single stitch right here. And it will pull up the bobbin. You can see the bobbin thread coming up right here. So all I need to do is cut close to my quilt top. I'm going to clip these threads close to my quilt top. And then I can hit continue. So I've pulled my bobbin thread. I did the single stitch already. I used the single stitch from the previous screen. Now I can go to next. So now the machine is going to move so that I can mark for the next row. So at this point, I should place a sticker under the needle and then tap single stitch, which would be right there. So you have to pay attention to that. It was telling me to mark the clipped stitch. So that was one of the stitches that did not appear because it was clipped off. So I'll have to pay attention to that when I get ready to set my next row. So now in this area, I'm also going to tap the single stitch button. I could place a sticker here, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to use the marker, single stitch. Okay, and again, I can see where my thread is. So I'm going to make a little mark there, and I'm going to move to next. So now my machine is going to move all the way over to the left, and I could have helped it over there. I am now marking for the placement of my next row. And single stitch. I could again put a sticker under here, but I'm just going to mark it, single stitch. And I'm going to mark where the thread came out of the quilt top. Okay, next. It's time to move the fabric. I'm going to tap OK after I've moved the fabric and I'm ready to proceed. So what I have to do is shift my fabric over to the left because I cannot put any more rows here. I'm going to undo my clips. say okay. Okay, so where am I now? I am here on the far right. So I can touch that. All right, so it's asking me, move the needle to the quilt top edge and tap the associated gray node on the screen. It's going to turn from gray to green. And remember, part of this pattern was clipped. That's the tricky part. So you still have to mark the area where the pattern was clipped. And that's the point that we are going for, which is this point slightly above in the area where pattern has been clipped. Set the quilt top edge. Move your needle to the quilt top edges and tap the associated gray node on the screen. Okay, that would be there. So that would be that. I have to set my right edge point. So from there, moving over to this point. So I'm going to set it about here. Let's see how that looks. Up there. Okay. And then I'm going to move forward. And set that point. Okay, next. Now, set the left placement. Move the needle directly over the last stitch of the design you are connecting to. So in our case, that last stitch was clipped off, but I have a marking here that tells me where it was. So I'm going to set the left placement and then tap the gray node. And that's where that would be. Tap, move right, or I can actually help it over there. Very close. Tap, move right. Tap, single stitch. Next. Okay, move the needle near the start point and tap starting stitch. Okay, start point is over here, near. So move the needle near the start point. Pull my bobbin. Next. Sew, and it's going to lock on and begin sewing where it's supposed to, hopefully. Lock stitches. Start sewing. So the tricky thing about this pattern is when you have part of your pattern that's been clipped off, but then you also have to connect to that. So if you have a pattern where it's been clipped off at the top and you're not sure if that's going to line up because you don't have a trace feature in the lower tier edge to edge, pull your bobbin thread out, unthread your needle, and let it stitch to see if it's going to line up. Then you won't have to unsew. So the rest of stitching out an edge-to-edge pattern on the hoop frame is very much like a rolling rail frame. except you're moving it from side to side. When you get to the point of you're at the bottom of your quilt, you will select the bottom part or the bottom edges of your quilt. And it will cut off any pattern that you don't need to stitch. So I'm pretty pleased with the way that's stitching out. When I had the red toolbox, I could have gone out of automation and used my handlebars to stitch down the top of my quilt. But I didn't. All right, I'm finished. So I'll move my machine away, pulling out some bobbin thread. I'll move it back. I can either hit continue or do a single stitch and break thread right there. Let's do continue. Single stitch to pull bobbin. And again, oops. You can see the bobbin thread come up right here. Here is that bobbin thread that was pulled up by a single stitch. And then I'm just going to clip close to the quilt top. And you're all done. All right. Thank you for watching. I hope that helps you quilt a larger quilt on a hoop frame by moving it from the right side over to the left side and connecting your pattern, even if the top part of your pattern was clipped off. So I hope that helps, and I hope you'll try it. God bless.